Melissa, thank you so much. So good morning, everybody. It's always a pleasure to be here. As Caroline was doing her process, I was reminded of something that John Steinbeck once said, where he said, I wonder how many people I've looked at my whole life and haven't seen. You know, I wonder how many people I've looked at my entire life and haven't seen. So my talk this morning is to be seen or see and see somebody, or look and see, or something like that. So when I looked at the talk title, what came to me is, what does it mean to live an undefended life? Because that's how we're truly seen. And it's how we truly see, because when we are defended, when we have an agenda, when we have something to prove, then that affects our perception of things, and we are looking at things through the eyes of our own agenda, as opposed to being curious as to what's possible. And as Caroline was saying, you know, what would the world be like if we truly saw each other, as opposed to looking at each other with the eyes of extraction? What's in it for me? Which is often just it's that sense of power. And I've been thinking a lot about power lately. You know, in New Thought churches, we talk a lot about, you know, qualities of God. You know, God is strength, God is order, God is power. And I'm like, who needs those things? Because really, what God is about is novelty and joy and love and connection. And those other kinds of things, I think, are toxic mimics for breaking through of this illusion that somehow or another we've lost our way, or that we are separate, or whatever the story may be. Anybody that's talked to me this last month has known that I've been chewing on this line from Bob Mesley, who wrote like a fabulous book on process theology, where he says, the cosmos is like a jazz combo, rooted in the past and innovating as it goes. Yeah, you know, and I often quote Teilhard, as you know, and Teilhard says, you know, that we are evolution become intentional. But how we are intentional, how we are novel, how we are innovated is rooted in the past and making it up as we go. Responding to, reacting, learning from, seeing what may happen and where it goes. There's this line from Walter Brueggemann that I deeply love, where he says, memory is to hope as amnesia is to despair. Memory is to hope as amnesia is to despair. And we're going through these celebrations, you know, Passover, Ramadan, and not Christmas, Easter. I mean, it wouldn't be an Christmas if there wasn't an Easter. So an Easter, which are all kind of rooted in the Abrahamic traditions. And we tell the stories this time of year so that we will remember. That's what it says. I mean, you go to a Seder and they say, why is this night different? You know, why are we doing this? Why are we eating this food? Why are we doing all this? So we will remember. And what do we remember? Well, we remember the truest thing about us, which is that we are the beloved of the divine. And that's where true freedom comes from. And I've been thinking about this quite a bit because, you know, we're in the Easter season. And it's kind of interesting, you know, my community, I make a big deal about Easter. And Easter is not a day. I mean, it's a day. But Easter is not really about the event that happened in the past. Because if you think about it, it has nothing to do with a missing body. Because none of us were there, none of us really know what happened. And when you read the Gospels, they're not talking about, where the body went or who had the body. What they're talking about are people who encountered the living presence of the Christ presence, and their lives were changed forever. In the book of Acts, chapter 4, verse 20, I know that because that's one of my favorite numbers, 420. There's a line where Peter and John are dragged before the Sanhedrin, and they're being told, don't talk about what's going on. And they say, we can't help but talk about it. We can't help but talk about it. That's not power, that's joy. That's innovation, that's novelty, that's seeing things new. And in the ancient world, Easter is considered a state of mind. And it's also a time of year so that we remember. And we remember what we're looking at and with the eyes in which we're seeing it. And how interesting it is to see the world from the eyes of the resurrection. Behold, I make all things new. That the sorrow is filled with joy. That the despair is filled with hope. And, it's interesting. It's interesting for me. It may not be interesting for you, but you're going to listen to me because here you are. I can't believe I did this, but I just finished reading Lord of the Rings again for I think like the 6th or 7th time in my life. And, it's interesting because literature like that, like Dante, what happens is you become immersed in this story and you realize that it's the soul's journey. And so I found myself last week just in this deep funk kind of place, just this stuff. And, the eclipse was, of course, building, and that was part of it. And then it was really interesting to me because what I also noticed is this was the time in the story that I had traveled to Mordor and what that looks like. And Mordor is the result of this distortion based on power, of remaking things in our own image, and where that will eventually take us. And I was just kind of really stewing in this, and mercifully, that passed, and the eclipse happened, and then there was this new sense that I was feeling, and then what I came with, that I'm sitting with, is at the end of things, at the beginnings of things. What this eclipse has been saying is that all of us are at the beginning of an end for a new beginning. That something is passing for something else to come forward. And that our roles change as a result of that. In Lord of the Rings, there's this one character, there's this woman, her name is Eowyn, and I won't go into the whole thing, but I could. But she has been a warrior. She's a shield maiden. And, she's almost clinically depressed because she's denied the opportunity to fight in the great battle. But when the battles have been fought, she realizes that her entire life has been lived with this sense of urgency. And what happens when that sense of urgency passes? We are given an opportunity to reinvent ourselves, to become a gardener from a warrior, remembering Isaiah, to beat the swords or the spears into plowshares, and to come away into this new place. And what's interesting about the resurrection story, and is that the whole story of Jesus is not about personal salvation. Let me make that really clear. First of all, in the time of Jesus, in the teachings of the Abrahamic religion of Judaism at that time, the concept of individual or personal salvation would have been completely unheard of. It wasn't in the imagination of these people. And it wasn't really even in the imagination of Jesus himself. The idea of personal salvation was something that was invented to get empire off the hook. Right? Because what we have a tendency to do is normalize things that are hurtful to other living things and then call that normal. So as long as our attention was paid on the individual, we forget what the entire message is about, which is about a new world, a new way of being, a new sense of community, this sense where everything is interconnected to everything else and nothing is separate from it. And that consciousness is the source of well-being, of joy. It's jazz. Thomas Merton says this. He says, there is in all visible things an invisible fecundity, a dimmed light, a meek namelessness, a hidden wholeness. This mysterious unity and integrity is wisdom, the mother of all, natura naturnas. There is in all things an inexhaustible sweetness and purity, a silence that is a fountain of action and of joy. It rises up in a worldless gentleness and flows out to me from the unseen roots of all created being. That is what we're talking about. That hidden wholeness that is within all things. Now, in New Thought, we may call it something else. We may call it the law or the mind or whatever we want to call it. But it's more than that. As Auden says, we play with powers we pretend to understand. But in the silence, to sit in that sense of hidden wholeness, where we can perceive everything as interconnected to everything else and nothing as separate, which, by the way, means us as well. And then we begin to cultivate the eye of the heart and the ear of the heart. As Pascal says, the heart has its reasons of which reason knows nothing. We know this in countless ways. It is the heart which perceives God and not the reason. That is what faith is. God perceived by the heart, not by reason. So again, if we consider this resurrection story, and this great thing that happened and where these people were encountering this consciousness of the Christ, where was it found? Wasn't found in an empty tomb. Wasn't found at the cross. John's gospel is very explicit where we find this resurrection quality, presence, hidden wholeness. It is found at the table. It is found when two or more are gathered. And it is found in the least of these. So when we are looking for where the resurrection has happened and where it is occurring and where it is in our own life, we look at the table. That place where all are welcome, where we nourish and tell stories and sing songs and take joy in each other's company. It happens where two or more are gathered, where there is a confluence of consciousness, a sense of agreement, a sense of consensus of what is possible. And it happens into those that we don't want to look at, the least of these, those that are living at the effect of empire and whatever iteration it is at whatever time, whether it be Rome or Britain or us or you name it or whoever or whatever, it's always the same animal. It's always trying to reshape things. It's always trying to extract. It's always untenable because it is built on taking, not uniting. My teacher used to say, be wary of statues that are built and we only tell half the truth. And that's kind of, I think, what happens when we look at this idea of Jesus being this sense of personal salvation, forgetting that his message was to the least of these into the world. Or Dr. King, Dr. King talks about, the I have a dream. We all know that, right? But what about his Poor People's Campaign? What about his resistance to the war? Thomas Merton the same way, and on and on and on. And all these great heroes, we want to kind of whitewash them. We don't really want to see them. We want to observe them so that we can feel good about ourselves. Or maybe I'm just talking to myself in that sense. The heart perceives, not reason. Because living in the experience of hope is totally unreasonable. But our heart knows it's true. Abraham Heschel, who is a great Jewish theologian, says, there are two ways of knowing: reason and wonder. And reason is what we do when we take what we've known and rearrange it to solve a problem that we're in at that moment. But there's no novelty in reason. It is simply knowing what we've known. But Heschel says that every day we should be surprised. We should be filled with amazement and awe. Because wonder, awe, surprise, they lead us to reverence or awe. And that leads us to insight. So if we are going to navigate ourselves into this new direction, if we are going to watch the beginning of the end of the new beginning, we do it with that sense that, yes, something is passing. Something is always passing. And passing invites us to grieve so that it can flow through us. There is no change without grief, and there is no grief without change. In other words, we're stuck, and we want to model things in a certain way. And the heart has reasons that reason doesn't know. And so we allow ourselves to move into that experience, to allow something to give way so that something can come forward. We allow ourselves to grieve so that in time our joy will be fulfilled. And memory is to hope as amnesia is to despair. The great uber myth of all myths, and it's the myth that's found in all religious traditions, and in fact in all stories, and basically in all literature, is the sense that we are lured, we are tempted, we are distractioned, we whatever, and we listen to the song, or we taste the fruit, or we do eat the poppies, as in The Wizard of Oz, or whatever the case may be, and we slip into a sense of amnesia. And when we do, when we forget who we are, then we are in bondage. But remembering who we are, and the most important and truest thing about us is really true freedom. Henri Nouwen says this, he says, self-rejection is the greatest enemy of the spiritual life because it contradicts the sacred voice that calls us the beloved. I know, chewing that one. Is that self-rejection is denying the truest thing about us. It's the greatest danger to the spiritual life because it's contradicting that voice in the heart that says, you are the beloved, that you are loved. And because you are loved, you are free. And because you are free, you may fully express who you have come to be, and the world is waiting for that. I've been in New Thought a long, long time, and I sometimes think that that we get distracted, that we fall into a sense of amnesia, and we forget how powerful we are, because we get stuck on things like princes or princesses and parking places and palaces and look what I can do, as opposed to look what God creates, as opposed to who is at the table, where two or more are gathered, where are the least of these. And in a sense, that hidden wholeness. Because, the history of New Thought, as it's continued to evolve, and by necessity in many ways, if you think about the mid-19th century when New Thought, as we understand it, and yet the teaching itself is ancient and goes further and further and further back than that what was articulated by the early founders of New Thought. But, it was all about healing. And it was about healing because medicine was frightening. And then the rise of the robber barons, and it was all about prosperity and the prosperity gospel. But we're more than that. The teaching is more than that. The teachers themselves are more than that. That hidden wholeness is more than that. Because it's about well-being. It's about joy. It's about connection. And when we have those things, then something powerful and wonderful and amazing begins to happen. And there's a tradition in the ancient world. It's still alive today. And I was reminded of this when Melissa was singing, come with me, come and see. Because if you think about the stories of the Buddha, or if you think about the stories of Jesus, there's a really interesting parallel between both of them. People come up to the disciples and say, what's with you people? Man, you guys just seem to be on top of it for some reason when everything else just seems not to be working. And the answer is the same. Come with me, come and see. Come with me, come and see. What is possible in a community of people who live from the consciousness of resurrection. But in all these communities, there's a very interesting thing that usually gets written up one way or the other, and that is that the disciples ask the teacher, how do you pray? Because how we pray is everything. And the mystical teachings are encoded in the prayer. And so the disciples asked Jesus one time, how do you pray? And he offered this, and let me just kind of muse it with you for a while. So he starts with our Father. Well, we know that it's not really a father, because if you look at the Hebrew Bible and the Christian Bible, there's all kinds of names for God. God is a hen. God is a mother. God is a father. God is a rock. God is a mountain. God is a breast, and on and on and on and on. But what Jesus is saying is that God is like a loving parent, meaning that its attention is on us, not you, us, our father, mother. Beyond that, our way to this presence, which is unrelenting love, that lives in the consciousness of well-being. Your name is Kadosh. It's holy. Holy means it's whole, it's complete, it is lacking nothing. Your commonwealth, may it come down here. It's not about dying and going to heaven, but about bringing heaven to earth. And let me be a part of it. Give us what we need this day. It's ours for the asking and the taking. And forgive us our debts as we forgive those whom we perceive to be in debt to us. because debt on both sides, the giving and the receiving, is bondage. And never let us forget, but let us always remember and guide our path away from forgetting, but from remembering and living in the beloved community with the consciousness that the Master lives. It lives when we are seated at the table, when we are together in community, and when we see the least of these. Thank you for your kind attention.